Let's
Hello,
do
my
it.
beautiful friend Jessica. How are you doing today?
I'm amazing. How are you?
I'm so fantastic. I'm so happy to get together with you today and share this uh, presentation for you and for the authors that are working with you on this book project. I'm so excited about it.
And I want to really specially thank you for the bottom of my heart of all the authors of this book and collaboration, really for taking the time and really training us on that. So thank you.
Oh, such a pleasure. My pleasure. And so I will say, actually, I love that you segued that in because I'll say, we have a lot of books that are out in the market that are collaborations of stories. And what we want is to ensure that all of the stories don't sound the exact same, but also so that all of them have a certain level. I have like a certain level. As I was just sharing with you, I'm a perfectionist, but a loving perfectionist. Like I want to hear all of your stories. I want to hear all of the, I can't wait to read these and get engulfed in all of these stories and know your lives. But what I also want is that your story, like you as in vous, like all of your stories are brought to the highest level that it can be told. Every story is unique, every voice is unique. There is no doubt, I don't want to make it like cookie cutter. I don't want to make it that every story looks and sounds the same. Keep it in your voice. But there's a certain, it's like a house always has four walls and a roof and a floor. There's a certain framework that we expect. You wouldn't want to move into a house that is missing one wall, because it's more artistic that way or it's more unique that way. You can have a very unique house by painting the walls different colors, painting the front door, painting the garage, painting, putting new curtains. Always respect someone's individual unique voice, but we want to make sure that the framework for the story is the best that we want the house to be as strong foundation as possible. And so that's what I'm hoping to make. That's my goal with teaching this story structure for your authors. And my second goal is to make it really fun.
Awesome. I love it.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
I know you're all about fun.
Oh, yeah.
So, so we're going to get into this. Now, for the benefit of your viewers, I'm also putting that there's a translation in French. And so if there are certain words that are more explanatory in French for your authors, then here is the solution for you. Because
Awesome.
I talk fast. I
Yes.
talk fast. Even English speakers have a hard time understanding me. So
Right.
this is a way to slow me down. So it starts with story. That's the name of this presentation. It starts with story. It starts with your story. It starts with the collective story. But more than this, in a metaphysical way, in a philosophical way, it, in a metaphor, it starts with story. If you picture it, when we go to a dinner party, when we go on a crew layover at a dinner, when we go in the back galley or the front galley, everything that we connect with other humans starts with story. We come in, we say, "Oh, let me tell you the story. I was late to pick up my daughter from school. I had a flat tire on the highway." And, whatever we're communicating, it always starts with story. And within that story, the listener, the other person in the galley, the other person at the dinner table, the other person at the cocktail party, it doesn't matter where. In our case, it's the reader now gets to interpret everything about you
Mm,
based on what you told as your story.
mm,
So choosing which story you want to introduce yourself with, it starts with that story. A whole world becomes familiar to the reader, to the listener, when you start with which specific story. What's important to you? What your family is like. Everything about you, if you, for instance, came with a story saying, I picked up my daughter late. We now know that your daughter is important to you. We now know that you're a mother that has a child of a certain age that needs to be picked up. We now know that running late is something against your values. We have interpreted all of those things because of the story that you chose to tell. So keep that in mind. How do you want to be represented? That's part of your story. Uh, the other thing is that we have to consider when we're telling stories as a written language, in written, when we are speaking in the back alley at the party at the dinner table, the person can see us.
Mm.
When it's flat on the page, the person cannot, the reader does not know if we're young, if we're old, if we're female, if we're male, if we're, what color we are, if we're tall, short, fat, thin, they cannot see us. So now all of the visual that they would have interpreted, would have seen, they're now interpreting through your words. So how do we make them really like us? That's the biggest part. The reader wants to get hooked in immediately with the know, like, and trust factor. So in the very, very beginning of your story, it starts with your story. There needs to be a hook that now takes the place of what it is that they're seeing about you or what it is that they're hearing. The words have to give them an image of you and the voice of you right from the beginning. So it starts with stories. So you have to choose which archetype. You know, humans work in stereotypes. When I said a house, you right away pictured a square with a roof. Every human does that. That's an archetype. It's an image we have in our head. The same thing happens when someone speaks, we create an image. Here's the great thing with you, with this particular group. We're all flight attendants.
Mm-hmm.
The reader automatically has an image that they are portrayed when they hear flight attendant. They think friendly, smiley, bubbly, service oriented. They already have this archetype in their head. So now in our first words, we need to present the other elements of what kind of archetype we want to take.
Okay.
In writing, we always say, show, don't tell. So instead of saying, I'm a 46-year-old mother of 3 with curly brown hair, right, which is telling you what you're seeing.
Right.
Instead, I can show it by saying, my dream was to be a flight attendant my whole childhood. Back then, we called it stewardess. And when I was 19, I got my dream job as a flight attendant, and I've been doing it for the last 26 years, even while raising my 3 kids, even with all the craziness. I mean, so much that it kept me young and kept me alive and kept me vivacious for all these years. That's called showing, not telling. I could have gone directly to the point by telling you my age, what I look like, that I have 3 kids, but instead I painted a picture for you of someone who's been in the same thing. Instead of saying I've been there 26 years, I said I've got the job, my dream job for all these years since I was 19, and I raised 3 kids through the time. Show, don't tell. What I did there is I gave you a different archetype. I call them, actually, in writing in general, if you go and study writing, they call them archetypes that you need to always involve in the story, a villain and a joker and all these kind of different archetypes. And that's why I really wanted to give this training here now, because for this project, you don't need to look at the archetypes. You don't want to incorporate a villain. You don't want to incorporate a joker. You don't. Those are writing staples. But for this single story that you're telling, your signature story, what you want to portray is a positive prototype. So only the beneficial, what would be beneficial for the audience to know you as. I don't know if I'm moving our Zoom box so that you can see. If I don't know if for you, if you're seeing the slides with us on the side,
Yes.
but I just want to give you the 4 positive prototypes are the reluctant hero,
Mhm.
the all-seeing reporter, the quintessential sidekick, and the mother or father figure.
Mhm.
The show Don't Tell that I just did for you just a moment ago was the mother figure. I chose to talk about having been at the airline, having been a flight attendant for such a long time while raising my 3 kids. You already are going to give me a certain level of trust
Right.
because of what I just without you being able to see me, what I projected for you in my words were that it was my childhood dream to be a flight attendant, and I've been one for a very, very, very long time.
Mhm.
And I'm a mother of 3, which means that that's important to me while still loving my job. So I created an image, a prototype in people's minds that this woman is the mother figure. And if you imagine that if I started my story like that, whatever story followed that, you're going to give me the trust and the like of a mother figure.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So starting it off right away, we're going to start with which prototype are you choosing to embody when you start telling your story?
Mhm.
The reluctant hero, for example, uh, the hero's journey is a very quintessential part of the story, kind of storytelling technique. It shows when you're telling some sort of hardship in your life, if you've undergone some sort of trauma, some challenge in your life, something that uh, you have grown wiser from it, you've evolved, and now you are an inspiration to other people. That means you're the hero archetype. If you were writing a full novel, you could go through all of the highs and the lows and the journeys and the lessons. But if you're writing a single chapter, a signature chapter
Mhm.
as a hero, then you have to introduce it as a reluctant hero along the lines of, I didn't choose, I would have chosen a different way, but here's what I know now.
Mhm.
Because people don't want to hear you say, I know this and I know this and I know this and I'm so great and I'm the hero. They
Mhm.
want to hear that you came by this knowledge the hard way. It was reluctant. You were reluctant to know this. By the way, this is the story template that we're going to be going through in the next slide, because very often for this kind of book, it is very often that sort of story because it's very impactful.
Right.
The only thing is that we don't want to have every chapter looking the exact same. So we're going to look on some variations of how to do the reluctant hero prototype. And so we'll come back to that. We're going to put that in the parking lot and we're going to explore some of the other ones. The all-seeing reporter. So this is like a report in the field, is very, very, very effective. And for anyone who says, I don't really have a story, I would say that you are probably the all-seeing reporter. This is the person who's standing and watching everyone else and has such a great understanding of what everyone else is doing. And now they're telling the story almost like a narrator, like a third person. The
Wow.
story is still as intriguing. The story can still have the highs and lows and the, very impactful. It's the reporter who's telling it that we're falling in love with.
Mm.
Just as a side note, most superheroes, if you think of it, like Spider-Man, do you
Mm.
remember what his job was? His day job?
I think he was a reporter, no?
He was a reporter, exactly. Um, what another one is Superman.
Mm.
Superman, reporter.
Wow.
Wonder Woman in her day job. Uh, it depends on which Wonder Woman franchise you're seeing, but she's sort of a reporter, even if that's not her actual job, but she takes this reporting of the environment before she steps in as the superhero, the reluctant hero, right? So the reporter is a very, very strong prototype. Someone who sees everything that's happening and reports on it. People undervalue this style of writing because they feel like they should be telling their story, that they should have some sort of traumatic challenge to overcome. But the reporter is actually probably the most liked character. And if you think of every movie that you watch, The Shawshank Redemption, for instance, has Morgan Freeman telling the story.
Right.
Everything, when you are the reporter, whatever you say that is whatever you say that's positive about someone else, that means that that's something that you value in yourself. So even as the reporter, the story that you tell, we're getting to know you just because of what you value.
Right.
The reporter is a great example of someone, especially if someone has, like for this book particularly, if someone has a story of something that happened online, like in flight, the reporter, that you can see that this is happening and this is happening, and you could see that person's face. It's the all-seeing. It's like you have the uh, the
Overview.
overview. Yeah, the bird's eye view.
Yeah.
The bird's eye view. So, and really, if you think of it, when you're sitting around a dinner table, because this is the biggest thing that we want, is to envision that the reader is sitting around one of our dinner tables when we're out on layover together, that they're getting to listen in to the conversations that we're having. So just picture when you're sitting around the layover table, if you everyone's having wine and there's snacks and there's bread and there's dessert. We know what a layover table looks like, and we're somewhere else in the world, and pickup isn't until 1700 the next day, and we've got time to sleep in. And what story are you telling? And if you're telling a story of like, oh, I've got a good one, then the lady at at 14 Charlie looked over at the gentleman at 16 Bravo. If you're telling those kind of stories, then you are probably the prototype of the all-seeing reporter. And dive into that, because that's a strong, people love those stories. So it doesn't always have to be your story of challenge and overcoming, right? The all-seeing reporter is a strong prototype to tell. Next, we'll move into the quintessential sidekick. When I wrote my second book, I put myself in the prototype of the quintessential sidekick. I could also call it the quintessential BFF, but I find that I've said that before to people, and they think that it's kind of girly, and maybe they don't want to write for guys, or even for people, women of a certain age. They're like, oh, BFF, one of my 14, and I'm so I called it the quintessential sidekick, which is true. You think of every superhero or every hero or always has a sidekick. Even ironically, there's an old show called The Lone Ranger. So he's alone, but he has a sidekick. There's, Yoda as a sidekick. There's always a sidekick in every great story. There's always a sidekick. And I absolutely love this. You could call it the quintessential BFF in your mind, or wing woman or wing man, where you're telling the story of something that happens to someone other than yourself, but someone who you really respect. You don't want to tell this story as if you're a snoop or a gossip. You want to tell the story of someone who you really respect and the lesson that you got from it. The moral of the story comes at the end of this. So if you have someone or a story that you've encountered through your life where you watched somebody do something incredible or live in an incredible way, again, all of those things that you respect about that one person shows what you value. It tells more about you than about them. And painting this picture of the quintessential sidekick, the quintessential BFF, has people want to be around you, because everybody wants a BFF, right? Everybody wants to have someone who looks at them and says, wow, I want to tell this story. You know, again, picture that you're sitting at that layover table and that your one crew member says, oh, no, 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 no. I'm going to tell this story about you because you are too humble to tell it. Now, I'm going to tell the story about this amazing person over here. And even if you think of it, when we have situations on board, especially when the adrenaline is going and and we're just in that flow of dealing with the situation, sometimes hearing someone else tell the story of how they saw us in that situation gives us so much more insight into ourselves, because during the moment we're not seeing straight. So something like the quintessential sidekick, it could be, this is why I respect this person so much. If you think of all of your absolute favorite characters from movies or books or shows, you love their best friend as much as you love them. Sex and the City, great example. There's 4 girlfriends. You might love one character more, right? Are you doing like this? You don't know, or?
No, I'm like, I love Sex in the City.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, all my friends are like, woo!
Right. Okay. So there you go. Perfect example. You might love one character the most because of her relationship with her best friend.
Right.
Right.
So true.
So writing as the quintessential sidekick. So even if you do love that show, I don't want to make references too much of TV, because what if someone who has never watched Sex and the City and now they have to go watch 5 seasons? But just think for yourself of any show that you like. Even I know that you have a young daughter. I don't know if she watches things like the ponies, like My Little Pony. It's the best friends that we fall in love with the character because of what their best friend says about them. Positive. This is a positive prototype. So we're not looking at those kind of friendships that are catty, or no, positive. Your best friend shines the best light on you, motivating, loves you, sees your flaws, but then also sees comes with, says like, oh, you're humble, so I'll be able to tell the story. It's a great way to tell stories. And like we saw with Sex and the City, it doesn't take away from the power of the main character.
Right.
It becomes it has the same depth. Choosing to tell the story from the voice of the quintessential sidekick tells as much about you as it tells about the person you're speaking about. And it shows your voice. And then the last positive prototype, like I've mentioned to you, is the mother figure. That's the way I introduced myself in the beginning of this, in the show Don't Tell example. The mother father figure is someone who is loving, someone who is patient, someone who has had some more experiences and is speaking from that way. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're older. You could be a young person taking a mother father figure role, because that's just the way that you are in general in life. You have this maternal, nurturing, or paternal sort of guiding kind of way about you. It does, of course, make an instant recognition that you're a mother figure when you mention that you have a child, because as soon as you say that you have a child, someone goes, they're a mother, they're a father. and they trust you.
Mm.
So that being said, for someone who is, let's say, a person who is bringing together a group of people to write a book, right? That is taking on a mother figure kind of role. It's bringing people together, it's nurturing everyone, it's seeing each one for themselves, for their own unique value, just like a mother would. So already in certain stories, certain things that we do in life take the mother father figure role. For us, we call them, for instance, a service director or an in charge, in different, leads in some airlines, they might be called. As a lead or an in charge, or the head of the crew, a mother father figure role would be appropriate, whether
Right.
you're a mother or father or not.
Mm.
It's just listening to your crew members, understanding where they're coming from, and then making the decision based on what's good for the collective, what's good for everyone. That's a mother or father figure role too. So keep that in mind when you're telling your stories. Which positive prototype do you want to choose to write from?
Mm. I
And
love
now, like I promised, we're going to look into the way to tell the reluctant hero story.
it. Mhm.
But first, I just want to touch on that every story has to have some wisdom attached to it, kind of like a moral of the story.
Mhm.
Every fairy tale, every movie, every novel, every story we tell, the good ones always has a message, a wisdom attached to it. You can choose to put the wisdom right at the beginning
Mm.
of the story. Something like, this is why we should never cry wolf. And then go on to tell the story of if if you get people to be worried, then they won't trust you later. Or you can tell the whole story and then at the end say, and that is why you should never cry wolf.
Mm.
In uh, article writing, or if you're ever going to take this story onto a podcast or a stage, or to use it in a book of your own, a full-length book, then you would also add to each story some information, a formula, and tools. And we're not going to concentrate too much on that for the purposes of this book,
Right.
simply because you're only writing a chapter. So you don't need to have too much. However, if you are writing a story that has something to do with a certain time, giving that information is appropriate. All right, so there is that. Uh, Adding in some level of research or statistics or someone's quote, like for instance, if you have a moral of the story that has a very strong, that that it can be better explained by giving a quote from someone else, that's adding in some information or some formula in that. If you're going to use this story to then, when you're booked on a podcast next time, or to speak on a stage, which you might be asked to do, or to give, even if you start doing Facebook Lives, because you're getting the promotional, having the promotional elements, then adding in information, formula, and tools is a very strong way to connect to different kinds of audiences. So if you're, for instance, asked to speak on a podcast of uh, a podcast that asks, how should travelers return, and now we're going to interview this flight attendant, um, or former flight attendant, or laid off flight attendant who's returned to work, or how do you how do you introduce children when you've returned to work, how do you parent, how are you a single parent? That's when you start to introduce those tools. You can bring that to make it, because podcasts and interviewers, even news stations, they want to make it relatable as a tool for somebody else, as a technique. So just keep that in mind. For the purpose of the book, that's not necessary, but keep it in mind that eventually you will be asked to share this information as part of your marketing.
Awesome.
Yes. So I call this the SWIFT model. And so this is actually creating your signature story, which is something that I develop in my workshops and my private one-on-one clients to create a story bank of these signature stories, so that if you have a 10-minute presentation, you give one story. If you have a 1 hour presentation, you give three. You weave together three, but you always have them ready. And at any time you're called to give a presentation somewhere, or a podcast, or you're being interviewed on the CBC or the NBC or Oprah channel, you have your story, your stories perfected. You want to give your TED talk, you have your stories perfected, so that they're right. Because this is, I want to say, you and I both know, writing a book opens those doors.
You're
So
talking straight at me with all of
you,
this, so I'm very grateful. I'm excited.
good. I'm really glad, because now we're getting into the meat of it.
Yes.
And hold on tight, buckle your seatbelt. It's gonna get fun. This is the part that is really where the rubber meets the road. As I told you, we would look at the reluctant hero story, which is also, the hero story is also called the origin story.
Mm,
Like I said, people don't want to hear you starting with, I am so great. I know everything. I am, I'm just so smart. I'm brilliant. I got it all together. And I was born this way. Because then they're going to hear that and they're going to think, well, lucky for you, I, I'm I'm laid off. I don't have the chance to travel. I have no idea what else I'm going to do. So I can't even listen to you. The biggest example of this, because, and this isn't, I don't want you to think that I'm leading you to in any way give this kind of a story, but it's the example of uh, someone who goes through a weight loss journey. Woohoo! I'm, you know, like a size 6, and whoa, look at me, summer body. And someone who's, especially after COVID, 40, 50, 60 pounds heavier than they'd like to be, goes, well, lucky you, my metabolism isn't like that. I don't have that energy. Very different.
right.
If the person comes and says, today, I am at my ideal weight. I have the most energy I've ever had in my life. I wake up in the morning not dreading going to the gym. I wake up in the morning doing a small 20-minute exercise that my body just loves. And it's the same exercise that I found that helped me lose 60 pounds and get me out of depression when I was laid off and sitting on my ass all day. I was not always this slim and energetic and loving my body. I had to learn the hard way, and here's what I did. How much more would you be willing to listen to that person? And like I said, I gave the example of weight loss, and I don't want that to be the only, I don't want to put it in a frame that makes you think that that's the only thing I'm talking about, but it's just one that is really easy to imagine.
Right.
Because that is, some transformations happen on the outside of the body and some happen within.
Right.
But the framework for saying it is you want people to come along on the journey with you, but you don't want to scare them off so much that, as if you've always known these things, that it's not relatable to them. You want them to relate to your experience. So you start with, today, I am, and then you state what it is that you are. Could be in a happy relationship. It could be, you know, a new successful business, that you're a, successful business owner, creative endeavors. It could be that, you today you love, you understand what self-love means, and that you identify with who you really are. But it wasn't always this way.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be, and then you give one example of the things that you used to be. I used to put myself on the sofa, drinking wine at night, trying to forget all my problems. That made me completely lack of energy. Uh, I knew that there was something more for me, but I didn't see the way out. And because of that, I was dying inside. I didn't know where else to turn. It got so bad. And then you go to the bottom of what got so bad. What was the worst thing? This is called an epiphany bridge. We hear it from Oprah. She calls it an aha moment. But it's that moment where you go, oh my God. And whatever that might look like for you, it might be the moment that you realize that if you went on this way, you'd live this way for 40 years. It might be that someone else said something. It might be that your daughter looked at you and said, you know, Mama, you're always tired, or something. Something happens, and it happens in every single one of our lives. And this really, this moment of being down is critical for this kind of story template. Very often I see authors, the biggest mistake that they made is that they try to push this one under the rug, the lowest moment, because it's embarrassing. That lowest moment. And because they don't reveal it, they're actually doing a disservice to their reader, because the reader already feels that low. And because the author didn't gift the reader with that, the lowest point, because they're still holding shame or embarrassment. And that is normal. And you actually know that that's the thing that you need to write because it's bringing up resistance in you. I can't write that. I can't reveal that. My parents don't know, my children don't know, my partner doesn't know. That is shameful. And I'm here to tell you that that feeling of shame is part of the human experience. Like, it's the great irony is that every single one of us feels that and knows what that feels like, and yet nobody wants to talk about it because every one of us feels ashamed for feeling that low. It's the greatest irony of all of humanity. Each one of us feels that for different reasons. And yet we always look at the other people and say, well, you can't. Look at you, you're happy and functioning in life. You could never have been as low as I was. And let's start to bring that around. And it doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be long. It could be just one sentence, but that sentence has to be deep and profound and give it the intensity that it deserves. And then after making that realization, you start to make gentle changes to go upwards. You didn't shift after that realization. It's not like you woke up, suddenly had this realization that you're 60 pounds or 100 pounds overweight. And the next day you woke up and went, ha, look at me. I'm going to be 100 pounds less. And that was when I made the change. And that's it. You have to give us the climb out. How did you climb out of that low point? How did you, in the example of weight loss, how did you go from 100 pounds overweight to 95 pounds overweight? From 95 to 85, and so on. Because you didn't revolutionize your life in one step. There were a few steps to come out of that. And then you can say, and now I am, and you repeat what you said at the beginning with today, I am in a happy relationship, great, great mother, running my creative business that is more successful than I ever thought it could be, living my wildest dreams, and bring them out of that. Does that make sense?
Total sense. I'm taking notes because I'm like, oh my God, already ideas brainstorming in my mind.
Awesome. Well, as a gift to you, you're actually going to get a little fill in the blank, do it yourself.
Oh my God.
Easy peasy like this. And like I mentioned, this is only one template. So I don't want every single person who's writing in this book to follow exactly this template. Uh, find the other prototypes and write from them. I will also say that incredibly, because each person has their own unique voice,
Mm,
it's like I gave back the example at the beginning. Every house has
right.
4 walls, a floor, and a roof. You don't want a house that doesn't have 4 walls, a roof, and floors. And every house, even in the same neighborhood, can start to look different by having a different door, different curtains, different bricks, different roof color. So you make the differences in your stories by giving it a different voice, different flavor, different colors, different, different prototypes. And even though it's the same framework, it starts you see as you're putting it together, they're actually very different.
Mm,
It's amazing to see. Uh, don't try to be so unique that you're reinventing the wheel. That's like reinventing a house. Keep within the structure, and you'll see that as you write, yours becomes a different vibe. It just becomes a different vibe. I will even actually end with a metaphor for us because we know every airplane has a fuselage and 2 wings,
right.
a flight deck in the front and a a galley in the back and seats in between,
Yes.
right? Every aircraft has to. You don't want an aircraft that doesn't have wings or doesn't have a flight deck or doesn't have
Missing a piece at all. Just
right, right. It needs to have a fuselage. This is your fuselage, and every single flight's going to be different.
oh yeah.
Every story is going to be different. Every flight's going to be different.
Oh, great
And
metaphor. Thank you.
my pleasure, very distinct for us. And with that, I think that that is the end of our presentation. Unless you have any questions.
Oh my God, I feel like it was very, very straight to the point, like a lot of things I didn't know. So I'm so grateful that I'm learning this and that we do have the plain fuselage that we can go with and just add our own flavor and add our own story of what our flight is
Yeah,
going to look like. So I don't think
wonderful.
I have any questions. So much. You're awesome. Very, very.
My pleasure. And with that, so I'll just end by saying good luck to everyone. Happy writing. I always say write on and know that your story needs to be out. The world needs to hear the story that is that lives within you. You've got to bring it out. You've
Mm,
got to bring it out. So I'm
yeah.
so honored to be on this journey with you. See you
Yay.
soon.
See you.